Welcome back. We're in part 10 of the Chris Watts prison interview analysis, and I've been looking forward to this one because as disturbing and depressing as a lot of this can be to go through and cover and analyze, there's also these great moments of catharsis and satisfaction that you come to by pulling some truths out of it and what you can take away from it, as horrible as it is by itself and would be better off if it had never happened. Instead of it being completely negative, it's good that we can take some positives out of it. And in these last few videos to cover it, there's a lot of them. And I've been looking forward to it. Like, when I got to thinking about doing this whole series, I was thinking, I don't want to go through that, but if I do, at least I can get to this. So here we are, and it starts with, like, where we left off. They start going into Chris's history of violence. Like Tammy brings up how when the crime started, they were saying, I bet you're going to find Chris tortured animals and stuff like that. You know, was there any examples of showing violence or rage in your past, Chris? And Chris recounts it in that deceptive way of, not really, and recounts innocent tales that every kid does. You know, like he had a bad haircut that someone made fun of, so he ripped their shirt and they both cried. And he doesn't really go into anything that would lead to this, obviously, but after the vast difference between Chris's statements, generalizing things, and the details of his stories that he actually tells, I wonder what kind of a turd he's polishing now by telling these stories of innocence in childhood instead of any actual markers that you could point to saying, well, maybe I started going down the path to rage when I did this to a cat. Can't have anyone knowing about that. And in part 12 of my interrogation review, I brought up some allusions to possible violence in his past and how he and others may have dealt with it. And thinking that a crime this big, in that how many moving parts were involved and how many lies he had to keep track of and how comfortable he was just retelling them, like he seemed very, as awkward as they came off, he seemed natural, like he had rehearsed them for a long time and had them memorized. So no murderer will just start off with a crime that big, with that many moving parts and that many things to keep track of. So I alluded to the possibility that he had done something like that before in all of his times that are not covered by any footage or any interviews. And someone in the comments to that video talked about a crime that took place where Chris lived between the ages of when he was 18 and 25, after he moved out of his parents' house and before he met Shanann, that whole area where he could have been the fledgling killer, you know, basically living a normal life as a bachelor, but when no one's looking, what was he doing in those many hours of free time he had? We see what he's willing to stoop to in his 5 weeks when Shanann was out of town with the kids. We see how much damage he cultivated there. So what was he doing in the 7 years where he was a bachelor? And I got to tell you, that crime that they linked from wherever he lived in the Carolinas in around, I think, 2007. I'm no criminal investigator, but it's easy to see Chris fitting the description of that unknown suspect that they saw, and that being his first sloppy attempt at a crime. And then he learned his lesson, because that crime was a pregnant mother with 2 small children that was murdered, and the suspect ran away and threw a bloody knife over a fence and got away. And I can just picture that being Chris and saying, wow, that was sloppy, I don't want to let that happen again. And then learning his lesson, then moving on to, here he is later doing a much cleaner crime of strangulation and smothering to not leave any bloody evidence, and having many more alibis. But that's all just speculation, because there's no official investigations into that. But all I'm saying is that if it turned out Chris was involved in that crime that was mentioned in the comments of part 12 of the interrogation review, then I would be about the least surprised person on the planet. So that was quite a coincidence. And we go back even further into Chris's history of his life, and we see kind of these forks in his life where he branches off towards what he is now, where he could have branched off towards being a normal adult who is capable of contributing to society in a positive way, but instead he branched off into someone who couldn't handle it and has to be locked away for the rest of their life for everyone's safety. When they get into, Chris tells a story of how his sister was the popular one, and Chris would wait with his grandmother in the car for his sister to come out of the school because she would take so long and be the last one coming out because she was popular and would talk to everybody. And Chris adds in the detail about how his grandmother was irritated by his sister taking so long to come out of the school because she had to pick them up and drive them home. So I can just see Chris in the back seat thinking, I'm the good one. I don't want to make my grandmother irritated like she's irritated at my sister. And then they go on to another thing that's told from both Chris and in other accounts. Chris's mom tells this story too, about how Chris's sister was the rebellious one and did her own thing. But Chris never even rebelled. And we see how much it bothered. That's unimportant to a child's development, whether or not they rebel. It's what are they rebelling? Is it right? And are they on the right path to being a responsible adult? Not the fact that they rebelled. But Chris, first of all, his mother shows how important it is to not rebel against authority. And Chris could look at that and just say, obviously he convinced his mom that he never rebelled. So once again, I'm the good one. I think Tammy even said that in the interrogation, like, I'm the good one, imitating Chris. His sister rebelled, but he didn't. He saw how it affected his mom, and he said, I don't want to get on her bad side like that, so I'm not going to rebel. And so we see those are two examples to start with of how he was unable to reconcile the negative or anti-authority or anti-social thoughts that go through all of our heads. We all have to reconcile those with actually behaving in a proper fashion. Even though we have the worst thoughts that have ever been imagined, because that's your brain functioning, but we have to behave most of the time not according to those thoughts, because most of them are useless, or they're just possible scenarios that we don't really need, other than how we can protect ourselves from it happening in our lives. But Chris was never able to reconcile being the good boy and how to address those negative thoughts that we all have. He was too focused, and it was too important on him. We can see to this day, going all the way back to childhood and all the way to this day, he's still that little kid who wants to be the good one, the good boy. And another thing, on top of being the good boy, we see a clue to how he developed as a liar when he still remembers and takes seriously the story about how he fooled his teacher by writing the story of what he did his summer vacation, how he just made up a whole lie about going to Japan or China. And he talks about it like, yeah, she believed me. I was really convincing. And I wonder if he's just trying to repair his image as a good liar. And because the teacher didn't believe him, she was just being nice. You're not going to scrutinize, what is he, second grade? You're not going to say, Chris, did you really go to China and Japan? No, she's just taking him at his word because there's nothing on the line for her personally, whether or not he's telling the truth or lying. It's just a school assignment that she's going to grade and forget about. But I can see, like, when the teacher asked his parents later on, as he says, how was your trip to Japan? And they're like, what? You know, it took him off guard. I could see that being a very proud moment in Chris's life, that he was able to fool his teacher, and that his parents said, yep, that's how you get by in this world. You convince people of your reality. Probably not saying this, but they were all in sales and the automotive industry, so I can see that being met with positive reinforcement, the fact that he was able to come up with a whole story that never existed and convince his teacher that it was true. Because to this day, he doesn't say, Yeah, she probably didn't believe it, but she was just being nice. He says, yeah, she believed it. I was convincing. Sure you were, Chris. Tell that to your new wife at night. The toilet. I'm sure your wife believes it too. And then, here's where we get to, on that subject of thinking that he fooled his teacher and how he still believes it to this day, we get to the subject of Chris's IQ. And this is something I wished I'd gotten into the interrogation review too. The difference between IQ and intelligence. And it's actually funny because Chris, they're talking about all the tests he's taken to get into this. When he came to prison, they had to test him for his intelligence and psychological profile and all that stuff. And they asked him what his IQ was, and he says 140, 135, something like that. It's like he realizes they can check this, and they're going to see what it really is. So he tried to highball it by going with 140. Then, it might be 120, 135, 120, something like that. I believe he might have a 140 IQ. Because we saw and we have seen how good he is at memorizing things, recounting them, even if they're not true. Very good at keeping track of all the moving parts in his master plan. That's not something that everyone can do, so he does have a good aptitude for keeping track of many, many bits of information. But what does that have to do with intelligence? Because everyday human intelligence is different than just having pattern recognition and memory. And the reason I want to bring this up, it's very important to this whole case, maybe the most important part, when you might be thinking of Chris as an evil genius. If humanity had ever gotten to a point where every single human being had an IQ of 140 and thought exactly like Chris, that would have been the final generation of humanity's existence. Because everybody would have just been thinking about themselves and would have not cared who they had to step over to get what they want. We see Chris is willing to sacrifice for his own short-term benefit the people who should have been the most important in his life. So how intelligent is that? Well, that would have been the end of humanity. It takes cooperation with others to get to every achievement that humanity has ever achieved, all of the great technological advances. None of them have been done by a single person working alone. They've all been on the shoulders of previous generations, and they've all taken the cooperation of many minds working together. But Chris, the most important thing in his world is he will sacrifice anybody to get what he wants for himself, to make himself look like the best person in his own mind. So think about every happy moment from your life, every great collaboration, every hardship you've had to overcome where you thought it was horrible in the moment, but then when you got past it, you said, wow, that was really tough, and I hated being in that, but now that I'm past it, I'm stronger, and I'm better, and I have a better outlook on things, and I'm a better person now. None of that would have happened if we had ever gotten to a point where everyone was like Chris. It would have just been the same black nothing that took place before you became aware of your life in this world. That would have just kept going, and you would have had nothing, no happy moments, no achievements, no collaborations, no this video. We wouldn't be here going over this together. It would have just been black nothingness forever. And that would have been your non-life if we had ever gotten to a point where everyone thought like the 140 IQ Chris Watts, because everyone would have just been thinking about themselves. Regardless of the next generation would have died out, and there would have been no one to pick up the pieces, and then it would have just been a lot of nothing afterwards. So everything you've enjoyed, everything we've enjoyed together, everything that has been worked on together is all the product of good parents. And that doesn't mean biological parents, because Chris was a biological parent. And what I addressed in the interrogation review was he did go through the motions of a good parent for a few years. But every parent, in a sense that those who have procured the future for the next generation in a responsible way, all of those parents of the species are the reason that we get to enjoy everything that we've enjoyed in life. And it's our responsibility to procure the future for the next generations. And that's why every great thing has happened in the world, because of that. And every rotten thing in the world has happened because of people like Chris Watts. So 140 IQ, but when it comes to intelligence, human intelligence, it's a big fat 0. Good job, all of you good parents throughout every generation of history. And next they get into jobs that are available for Chris to do. And I swear to God, I'm not making this up. I swear to God, he actually said, yeah, there's a guy out there that's got to shovel the snow because they're in the dead of a Wisconsin winter with feet of snow piling up, and someone has the job of shoveling. And Chris says, I don't want to be that guy. Of course not, because then he would be shoveling the snow, shoveling the snow. And then we come to, after they're talking about Chris's purpose, he gets into all this deep philosophical thoughts about what his purpose is now that he's in jail and this is his new life. What's his new meaning in life now that he's not a dad anymore and never will be again? He'll never be a free man again. And they get into how he's been helping people. We covered that a little bit already in this prison interview analysis. How he's been helping people, other prisoners, and how people will ask for spiritual advice, and he'll send them scriptures and Bible quotes to help them out through their tough times. And we're saving, it's Tammy's eruption of broken character, and I saved the best for last. They saved the best for last, Tammy's eruption of broken character, because I think she's completely forgotten at this point that she's supposed to be Chris's friend when she says, they're asking for spiritual advice from you. And Chris recognizes that right away. Just like we already had Graham's schizophrenic breaking of character. Chris recognized that. We had Bombover's broken in character where he said, yeah, I was surprised that they forgive you, but they do. Talking about Shanann's parents. And Tammy says, they're asking spiritual advice from you. And Chris, like the other times, is like, well, yeah, I mean, you know. Oh, man, that had to sting. So eventually they get to the lunch break, and that ends kind of, like I said, how this is all, it's more of a play than a prison interview. And everyone's playing a character and pushing a narrative that doesn't exist. And they come to the lunch break, and that ends Act 2. Act 1 was kind of getting Chris comfortable with them and opening up about things that are not the crime. And then Act 2 was they're bringing him into the crime, and he's comfortable enough to talk about some things. Obviously, he evades a lot and is dishonest about a lot. But they've gotten him to the point where he talks about it, where he hasn't really done that with anyone else. And I think of Act 3, which takes place after lunch and for the rest of the prison interview. Act 3 will be known as the Kamikaze Mission, because they've realized they've gotten to that wall again, like they did at the end of the interrogation, where he just is holding up that security blanket of I didn't know what else to do or what was going on. So they just hit him with every question they can. They're still being his friend. They're still staying in character, but they're just hitting him with every question that they can to try to get the truth and not caring if he stands up and walks away. So we'll get into more of that in part 11. See you then.